the podcast starts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast where sometimes we talk about horror, sometimes we talk about other things, and sometimes we swear. My marvelous co-host today is Kirsty Warrow.
Hello.
And I am your often hapless other host, known as TD Velasquez, but you can call me Dan, bless you. Now, we are back on our monthly schedule for releases. So just before we go into the main topic, just in case you didn't hear our previous episode, we used to be a weekly podcast. That's got a little bit too much for us all. Now we're monthly, but we might drop occasional bonus episodes in between our monthly episodes. And now, as you will know, if you've read the title of this episode of the podcast, we're going to be discussing a movie that I think is so important that we will foreground the main discussion of the movie and leave out any news tidbits to the end of the episode. Yeah, it's a movie that's very important because it's 100 years old, almost exactly. Do you want to say anything more about that, Kirsty?
Okay, so the film we're going to talk about is Nosferatu.
Yeah.
F.W. Murnau's absolute classic, 1922. I mean, I've been teaching this film for many years now, and it wasn't obviously 100 years when I started, but
it just feels like it. No, it doesn't.
It makes me feel very old now. So it was it had its world premiere in Holland, also the Netherlands, on February the 16th, 1922, and we are recording Check's Watch calendar the 17th.
Wow.
So a day after, an official kind of German premiere in Berlin on March the 4th. So there's lots of discussion in horror at the moment and horror communities around this film. Yes,
and you suggested we talk about this, and also our sometime co-host Ian pointed us in the direction of a nice series that you can hear on BBC Sounds called 1922, The Beginning of Now. Which suggests that modernism kind of begins in 1922, essentially. And certainly they make a really good argument in the case of Nosferatu. Mm-hmm. I've obviously seen this film before. I think the first time I saw it, in case the listener is unfamiliar with Nosferatu, it is an unofficial adaptation of Dracula. I think it's the first time anybody filmed Dracula. Is that correct, Kirsty?
I was just looking, and I think there was a slightly earlier attempt.
Oh, right.
The first film was called Draculas Death.
Okay.
In 1921, but it's not. It's a very, very loose adaptation, and it includes Dracula, but everything else is different.
Dracula's Death, did you say the title was?
Yes.
So that's not a movie that has, endured in the consciousness like Nosferatu has. But on the other hand, because it includes the word Dracula in the title, perhaps they did actually pay for the rights to use the character.
Yes.
Which the
producers would imagine so.
Which the producers of Nosferatu did not, even though it is a very clear, clear adaptation of the story. So, when I first watched this movie, it was a different centenary. It was in 1997, which is the centenary of the publication of the novel. Nosferatu was re-released with a new score, and I watched it a couple of times back then. I've never seen it since, apart from today. And how wonderful to be able to revisit it, especially in the age of HD and things that we have now. But I suppose the first thing to say about Nosferatu, and I don't know if you know more than I do about the background to this, Kirsty, is that it's based on Dracula, but they didn't actually. Whether intentionally or not, they didn't have the rights. They changed most of the character names, although I've read it suggested that was just part of the adaptation. They're moving the setting to Germany. Yeah. They probably would have done that anyway, even if they did have the permissions. But the storyline is very much...
very similar.
It's very... I mean, obviously, we discussed Bram Stoker's Dracula on here before. We know what a pain it is to adapt that particular book faithfully to the screen. but this film does more or less cover up most of the main bases of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as a result of that, and you know, doing it in such a way that even though they changed the names, it was fairly clear, they were sued by Bram Stoker's widow.
Yeah,
Florence Stoker, yeah, and she successfully she won the case and tried to get every print of the film destroyed. But this did not quite happen, and in fact, the film was soon re-released by its Canadian producer under a different name, re-edited. So basically, it's like, curses, that didn't quite work. Let's try again and do it better this time. And as a result, the film has kind of survived, been restored. The music that was originally written for it has partially survived, and you can watch versions of the film where they've kind of reconstructed the musical score and filled it in with new bits. But basically, that's my knowledge of the movie very quickly. You've been teaching it for years. I think you probably know a lot more. So I'd like to know what you'd like to say about it. And I'll chip in if I can.
I think for me, so much to say. I've been thinking over the last couple of days since we decided to do this about my relationship to the film, about kind of favourite moments and why it's important overall in horror. So I don't really know which of those points you want me to hit first, Dan.
Can I ask you a question? The film was suppressed and re-edited and then later restored. So do you know if it's now complete, or is it like Metropolis where there are certain bits of it that have still never been found? I mean,
I last saw it. I was thinking about this. I don't currently teach it. I've not taught it for about 4 years now, just because I had a choice and I had to opt to my slightly more favourite German Expressionist film.
Right. Which we'll come to in due course.
So the last time I actually saw it in last year in Shrewsbury Abbey with an organ accompanist.
Oh wow! Brilliant.
And obviously with Metropolis and obviously Caligari had a big 4K re-release 5 or 6 years ago. From my recollection, I think the film is as complete as it's going to be. It doesn't, unlike Metropolis, where there are clearly big gaps in and footage that is very much worse for wear. This doesn't feel like it, and I think the kind of version we've got seems to be the most complete, and it makes sense as well. Kind of gaps in it. So
it feels complete as a story and as an adaptation. And just seeing as I brought up the adaptation side of it, I just want to quickly get your feedback on this. I think it's a really strong adaptation of the Dracula story, isn't it? And it is still the Dracula movie that all others must be judged against. So many of the elements of the story, it's not that it necessarily creates those moments in a way that the chimes with how the character might have looked in your head, or the moment might have played in your head when you read the book, but it does them kind of immaculately as a cinematic sequence. I mean, I can't imagine a better Renfield, for instance, than there is in this movie. Obviously, he's not called Renfield. The character is called Knock, which, thanks to BBC Radio 4, I now know is German for bones.
I've just been calling him Knock for years.
Right.
So that's useful. That's the thing about Silence in the Moment. You just it's just all intertitles. You just read it and gonna go, oh, okay. That's how you pronounce that. So I was mortified earlier this week. I was like, oh, it's Knock.
Yes, and although not in any way kind of playing into the kind of romantic Gary Oldman, Bram Stoker's Dracula kind of version of the Dracula character, it's a fantastically terrifying version of Dracula, isn't he? I think he's still possibly the scariest.
And I think he, certainly it sets up, doesn't it, that the kind of the archetype of the vampire, which we don't see as often on screen. The the one that's genuinely scary, that you wouldn't want to kind of find leaning over you and in bed at night. Not that I would, obviously, but it's like the kind of we have so much in our popular culture, and obviously we talked so much about Dracula and True Blood of the kind of sexy, alluring male vampires, where you kind of got a little bit like, okay, bite me. Count Orlok is not that guy. It's absolutely not that guy. The rendering of the character is, it's iconic. It's genuinely unsettling. There's something genuinely monstrous about him, which again, kind of given the era and off the back of, it's a year later than Caligari, which didn't have as much money, obviously, and it was much more, kind of two-dimensional. Its presentation of kind of monstrosity. This feels much more, kind of three-dimensional, fleshed out, and so therefore affecting. And one of the things I love particularly about the film is the way that Murnau really uses, in the cinema, what cinema can do to create that sense of horror. So there's a scene early on, or kind of a couple of shots early on, as part of Hutter's journey into, the Carpathian Mountains, where there's a sort of, I'm not quite sure if it's negative.
Yeah, it looks like they've made the film negative,
which is really kind of affecting and sort of I find anyway kind of visually kind of inventive to sort of suggest this horrendous inversion of nature.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and there are kind of inventive tricks throughout doing things like that.
Yeah, with stop motion and other things, which is kind of for that era, it feels like such a feat.
Yeah.
And genuinely kind of adds to the kind of horrible uncanniness of Orlok.
Yeah. The trick that I mean, among many elements of the film that are homaged in Bram Stoker's Dracula, I noticed that it's really prominent, the technique of running the film at slightly to the wrong speed when Orlok is on screen, just so that his movements become not just fast but also just strange looking, human, and that kind of stuff is wonderful. And I can't stress enough how immaculate the movie looks in an HD restoration. We could talk about all these things and count them in the context of for the time. They're using all these techniques and it's so experimental and groundbreaking. All of that is true, but at the same time, there is just such a sharpness to the way they achieve most of these effects that it still has power. And even if you might, as a viewer, accept all those things, but still black and white is a barrier for you. Some people can't deal with it. This is a movie, as of course most German Expressionist movies are, where it just wouldn't be the same film in colour. I mean, can you imagine if somebody tried to colourize this?
No. Well, you say that, and no, I can't. But one of the things that I found was when I last taught the film is that I found a version, and I know that it was sort of done as a kind of experiment. There's a version of the film with sound that's been added.
Okay.
Which is just like
including dialogue or just kind of spot effects and atmosphere?
Well, there's the sense of dialogue, but without it being actual dialogue, I think, from my recollection. But it feels very like, sacrilegious in some ways, to kind of watch the film with all this, kind of added Foley sounds. And so I think one of the things that makes films of this era, and in particular, I think this film, really, really powerful, is that even when we watch it, kind of contemporary reissues and different versions with different scores by different people, we're kind of aware on some level that sound wasn't intended for the film. And so, in our, at least this is what I found, in my mind, it doesn't exist with any sound at all. Really, I can watch it with a live accompaniment, and I can watch it. There's one version which has got a really fantastic sort of kind of slightly death metal-y score.
Wow, okay.
Industrial and, but like I never take those things seriously. They don't inform my kind of understanding of the film, my response to the film. It's very much a silent film in almost its truest form, I think. So that's and that adds to the horror. It adds to the, kind of the uneasiness. And I think that this is one of the, I was thinking about this the other day, but I think it's one of the films you talked about in 97, the kind of that Dracula, centenary, which would have been right when I was, kind of properly engaged with all of that stuff. So I suspect I probably saw Nosferatu first at around that time, as part of that. And I think despite being interested in, kind of vampires and, kind of vampire literature and vampire films with Dracula and, Interview with Vampire, which we've talked about before, I think it was the first time I properly realised, I love horror cinema. That there's something,
nice.
Despite my love of other things, it was that, felt like a really kind of foundational moment to find this very, very old film and kind of go, oh, yeah, that's the thing that I'm really interested in. I'm unnerved by, but I'm a bit seduced by as well, kind of visually. And it has this hypnotic quality, I think, that again, I've not found any other kind of films of its, particular movement, that it, kind of has this, it's almost similar to Vertigo in the kind of sort of pacing of it, I think. It's sort of slightly lulling.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I kind of find it oddly, disturbing and horror, but kind of oddly comforting as well.
Okay. I did think it's quite quickly paced. Obviously, we're now getting into the age where films can be as long as they need to be, and they're often longer.
Yeah, they are.
And old films had to fit slots and things, and this film is only 90 minutes, but I found it really kind of trips along. But at the same time, it struck me that the film, even though it is short and it has a story to get through in a short space of time, it lingers on certain elements that maybe other versions of Dracula don't do. Like, I'd forgotten how much of the film takes place on the ship.
Yeah.
A lot of films of Dracula kind of act like the story doesn't really start till Dracula arrives on the ship.
Yeah.
But I think at least half this film takes place before he arrives. Yeah. There's more a sense of once he arrives in
Visborg. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Visborg. Which is obviously in the book. It's London or Britain.
Yeah. Isn't it Whitby and then into London?
Yes, because Whitby is right next to London. Yes. we all know that. But that is kind of where the main story takes place in many versions. But whereas it's more of the climax in this film.
Very much Act 3, isn't it? Very much.
Yeah. But I know what you mean about it being kind of hypnotic. Absolutely. Yeah. I just found it so delightfully easy to watch. And it is all about the visuals, even though the version I saw had the nice Hans Erdmann score, who I believe he's the man who wrote an original score for it at the time. And the score has since been partially lost, but this film had this version had a restored version of the score on it. But and that was lovely, but it's all about the visuals.
On that note, whilst you're we're in the kind of area of discussion where the boat is important, I just remember being so, like, once I kind of realised the kind of logistics of the era and the kind of, how difficult it was to make films back then. Just that kind of moment of going, oh my God, Murnau is not only shooting a ship, so he's got a ship, he's also put his camera on another boat.
Yes.
And so there's this beautiful kind of tracking shot along with the boat as it moves, and the only way you're doing that is if so just that one of the things he was known for is he talks about the English translation is the Unchained Camera, and he's one of the first directors to use camera in a subjective kind of emotive way, whereas kind of a lot of his contemporaries, not including Fritz Lang, obviously, because they tend to not move the camera as much. So, and that's the kind of notable difference, I think, between this and Caligari. As much as I love Caligari, Caligari is very much kind of proscenium arch, very much staged for the camera. And Nosferatu, although it's not quite as the camera work isn't quite as mobile as some of Murnau's later films, it definitely feels like he's learning how to move the camera and to make it kind of visually interesting, and not just kind of compose a really interesting frame for the camera, but also move it as needed.
But I mean, it's getting out on location as well, isn't it? I mean, for instance, I've seen Caligari, but it was a long time ago, but I remember it being very interior.
Well, it's all studio. This is mostly location,
And something I would stress about this film is that although you have the stylized elements kind of common to this period and this movement of cinema, you have the extreme makeups and the kind of mime-like physical performances, and you have some of the expressionist design kind of in the sets and things. You also have this absolute sense of just real life in moments. You feel like you're just watching a documentary film, from the early 20th century, and it reminded me of that kind of scale that you only started to get in movies again, I think, in like the 70s, when filming outside in natural light was more common, and you had like big budget blockbusters like disaster movies. So the scene in Nosferatu where the Count's coffins are loaded onto a raft, and you see the raft in long shot going down some rapids, and it's clearly a real raft with men on it. But it's like, I was just floored by that. And also, the way the ship is filmed, as you said, you cited that example, but when it pulls into the harbour of Visburg, I remember thinking that's either the best miniature I've ever seen in my life, or they just filmed an actual ship. It just looks incredible.
It does, doesn't it? And it gives, I think locating this, remarkable, unnerving, terrifying monster in settings that feel, genuine, because they are, is kind of a really impressive way of elevating that horror, because it does, and again, that's the the difference, as you said, between that and Caligari, is that Caligari doesn't at all feel real, even when spoilers, even when it should feel real, it doesn't, because it's just because of the kind of studio setting. So so this, it feels like a definitely kind of advance. I was wondering actually whether or not it's worth explaining what German Expressionism is as a film movement.
Go ahead. I mean, I think our listeners are educated horror fans, but not everybody is familiar with every movement of horror. So, so do please explain it. That's great.
So German Expressionism as a film movement arises out of the artistic movement of Expressionism. That kind of very much the aim of Expressionism was to relate subjective experience, convey emotions, and create emotions. So we're very much in the territory of heightened, kind of subjective, stylized representations of reality rather than authentic, objective ones. German Expressionism as a film movement was 1919 to 1927. Metropolis killed it because because it killed everything in German. No, didn't kill everything, but it bankrupted the biggest studio. So the movement begins with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1919, 1920, roughly, and ends with Metropolis, 1927. And there are about, I think, sort of 12 to 14 films that are included in the movement. yeah, so the kind of what unites them stylistically is this emphasis on chiaroscuro, kind of, light and dark, jagged lines, distorted angles, kind of something that it's everything that we know visually about horror kind of emanates from that period. Thematically, because these are films that are born in Weimar Germany, so this interwar period when everything was terrible. If you don't know why it was terrible, go and look at some history. But everything was terrible at that point. And so the German Expressionist films were a kind of way of, there's a really great quote from, I think, a guy called David Hudson, who talked about that German Expressionist films were, kind of reflected, kind of broken nation horrified by the everyday. I think that's the quote.
Right.
So thematically, they're about things that, again, horror is often about now. Evasion, distrust of authority, metamorphosis, kind of fear of disease, those kind of things. Nosferatu is interesting because it is the first German Expressionist film on location. So it has this kind of grand Gothic scale, and this, kind of the chiaroscuro comes out these, kind of jagged mountains against the sky, and the kind of lines of the, slightly broken down castle, and the shards of the, kind of broken coffin.
That castle, by the way, is just incredible. And another example of where I was going, that looks like a really extraudinary designed castle. Presumably it's a miniature. I don't know.
No, I think it's real. I think they've got the castle. Right. Yeah. There was Mark Gatiss did Horror Europa.
Oh yes, I saw
that. The kind of section that he did talking about Nosferatu was actually at that castle.
Oh, okay. So, yes, I remember that.
Yeah, so in location. So yeah.
Okay, good documentary that, which I must revisit.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, that's German Expressionism in a Kirsten nutshell.
In a nutshell, yeah. Nice work, Kirsty. That's a very effective summary. I'm trying to think what else I'd like to say about Nosferatu. There's obviously so much. We've only got limited time, so if there's anything else that you think we should importantly spend time on, please stop me. But obviously, it's worth mentioning Max Schreck.
Yes.
You're a fan of the movie Shadow of a Vampire,
I am.
aren't you,
I think it's a lovely companion piece to this, Shadow of a Vampire.
Yeah.
Although the consequence, I think, of watching Shadow of a Vampire is that then when you watch Nosferatu again, it takes on a much more kind of comedy vibe.
Right, okay. So Shadow of a Vampire came out in 2000. I've still never seen it. Maybe I should. Maybe it's a missed classic. But that takes the concept of that movie is it's about the making of Nosferatu, and that the actor Max Schreck, who played Count Orlok, was in fact, in reality, a vampire, which is a great concept, and Willem Dafoe plays it, and that sounds incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. But the bit that always sticks with me is that Eddie Izzard plays the actor who played Jonathan Hatter, and again I forget the name of the actor.
Right.
And so there's this lovely John Malkovich plays Murnau, and so there's a wonderful little sequence where they're shooting the scene early in the film where Hatter is in the kind of the bedroom in the inn, and he has in this book, the kind of mythology of whatever vampires and werewolves and whatever, and he picks it up and then just kind of throws it to the ground. Shadow of Vampire makes a really big deal, but kind of quite comedic deal of the, oh no, you have to reject it, you throw it away.
Right.
Kind of, rejection of the, kind of conventional knowledge of the people of the area and their wisdom about the vampire. So again, that is always a moment that now when I watch Nosferatu, I always find really, really funny. And it's not because the film itself is funny, it's just because I'm remembering Eddie Izzard wonderfully in that scene.
Right. Oh, that sounds fantastic. I really must go watch that. It's about time. That reminds me of when I first watched this movie. I remember talking about it to my friend Ben, who's been on this podcast before. He did a little bit talking to us about Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. And I always remember how Ben was full of heart going out towards Hutter. He said, Hutter at the start of the movie is such a happy-go-lucky guy. And he goes through this kind of horrendous kind of journey through the movie. And unlike certain other Jonathan Harkers, he doesn't. No names. But he absolutely. But he doesn't get to become the hero at the end. He doesn't save the heroine or defeat Count Orlok. He's basically not there. Yeah. He goes through hell. But he's a really effective lead character. And another thought that I had earlier, just spinning off something you said, is that we were saying Count Orlok is not that kind of vampire where the women really want him to enter into their boudoir or whatever. But it's really interesting that in this movie, the strength of the heroine, Ellen, who's obviously based on Mina, and I apologise to the actress whose name I can't remember as well.
Greta Schroeder, I think.
You are right, Greta Schroeder. He's not attractive. She doesn't want him to come, but the mechanism of the climax of the film is that she has to. She has to surrender to him, and she has to give herself up to him in order to trick him into missing the cockcrow. Which is quite. It's a reversal of what normally happens. Yes. And I'm thinking about the fact that, the bit at the end of Bram Stoker's Dracula, where they have the final confrontation and he's had his head half chopped off and he's turned into a horrible looking monster. But Mina is weeping over him because she loves him so much. Yes, absolutely. It's the opposite of that. And it's something which the character of Ellen does all by herself. No man comes and tells her that. Yes, she gets the knowledge out of this magic book, but everybody in the film gets the knowledge from the book. Yeah. If that book wasn't there, nobody would know anything.
So what's going on here? No, I think, it's Ellen's such an interesting character. I think that, there are so many of the, again, German Expressionists heroines who are, they're kind of paragon of goodness. But she sort of starts off as, you sort of say about kind of Hutter being, full of life and joy, and and he is. She isn't though. From the outset, I think one of the in their first scene, again, it feels very, as many of these things do, kind of contrived, but again, it's expressionist, so it's it's kind of meant to be kind of thematic. Her first, I think, line in the movie, as much as you can have a line in a silent film, is he brings her some flowers and she remarks about kind of they're dead, but they're dead. Also not quite that, but she's sort of inclined to sort of be slightly more mournful and slightly more kind of I suppose quintessentially Gothic kind of heroine. And I'm not sure I agree with the idea, your characterization, that she has to kind of, but she does. I think she chooses to.
Well, she chooses. Yeah. No, she chooses to. No, the point is that according to the book, somebody has to. And although it specifically has to be a maiden who does it. Yeah,
which wouldn't work, right? Because they're married.
Oh yeah, good point.
So, but he's obviously the closest thing he'll do. So she sends him away, doesn't she, to go and get the Van Helsing stand-in, who's called Bulwer, Dr. Bulwer, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So to kind of get rid of Hutter so that she can essentially do the thing. And I always wondered about to what extent in that conception she's, I want to say kind of like a final girl, but the death count isn't very high in this film. But the fact that she, kind of represents goodness and virtue and self-sacrifice and all those lovely things. And so she chooses to, sacrifice herself in order to defeat the monster. There's a sort of kind of final girl nurse, a very early prototypical.
Yes,
I suppose.
I think I think that's fair enough. And also, you say the body count is not high. The on-screen body count is not high. But, you know, there is a plague that happens at the end of this film. Or at least, it depends how you read. I kind of read it because it's not that it is something that doesn't happen in the book explicitly. But in this movie, Count Orlok brings a plague with him as he travels to Visborg. Yeah. And although I wonder if is it really a plague, or is it just that he's feeding on so many people and the people in the towns don't have any other explanation, that lots of people are just dying with these weird marks on their necks and they put it down to plague?
Well, I think either work. So
yes, either way it raises the stakes. It's like somebody should have looked at the manuscript of the book and gone, you could put a plague in here, really heighten the drama.
Yeah, but again, and again, this is one of the points the BBC thing made, which is, you know, kind of Spanish flu is very, very, you know,
yes, that's true. That or not obviously that's very recent in memory. That was 1918,
and we can emphasise it.
Yeah, completely, and that kind of thing had not happened when the novel was written, so it wasn't as obvious a kind of subtext. Yeah. To insert in them. So it's a really good modification to the end of the story. I see that, you know, we're coming quite close to the time limit. I've got one more question to ask you, but is there anything else you particularly like to get off your chest about Nosferatu?
Shadows. Just
okay.
Shadows and silhouettes. I mean, obviously there's the iconic moment, which I still. I think my first encounter with it was probably the Fast Show.
Monster.
The kind of, you know, shadow going up the stairs, which is just, you know, it. I don't want to go as far as saying it is the image of horror cinema, but if you're going to put, you know, kind of 5 iconic images from horror cinema together, it's got to be in that, you know.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also so regularly parodied that it's part of the extraordinary quality of the film that it is still powerful in itself, because even if you've never seen it before, you probably have seen that moment. I mean, I just kept thinking of you know, even before I'd seen the film, how many times I will have seen things like that. So The Simpsons did it, obviously the Fast Show did it, the League of Gentlemen did it, although that was after I'd seen the film. You know, there's just you could probably list 25 more, to be honest. And I did it. I mean, I did it in my student film at Sixth Form College.
Well, we did it in our student film at university. So like, it is from much parody by very, very good filmmakers and by us. No. Yeah, I forgot you did have some great shadow work in that movie. Whereas I didn't have that skill when I was trying to do it as a sixth former. You know, so the final thing I just wanted to mention is you mentioned the budget. It's sometimes referred to as low budget. I've noticed in things I've been reading about it. Do you think that's people misinterpreting it? Because that's one of the explanations for why they didn't get the rights to Dracula. They just couldn't afford it. Do you think that's reasonable? I think in part probably, but I also think there was probably an attitude of, oh, it'll be all right. I think it's really difficult when you look at a movement of film where, you know, the last film is Metropolis, which is the most ridiculously expensive film, that any film by comparison, any film literally will, you know, adjusted for inflation, look like a cheap film.
Right.
So it's certainly more expensive and higher production values than Caligari.
Right. Okay.
So it's a high budget. It's all about your frame of reference. It's very much, you know, if you're going to take the 3 most important films of this movement, which are Caligari, Nosferatu, and Metropolis, then Nosferatu is very much the mid-budget version.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of thinking about the legality of the rights and that, it probably was a real grey area in terms of cinema itself as such a new form. You know, there were probably very, very large question marks around, will people really notice? It's over in England. Will people care? And also, were there even existing kind of laws governing this kind of thing? Then I don't know if there would have been yet. So, but either way, it's a great version of Dracula, and it's a wonderful piece of art, and thank God we've still got it. Yeah,
and I'm so delighted that, you know, kind of 100 years on, it still stands up, and, you know, still want to talk about it. And just my social media feed this week has just been absolutely full. I mean, that says a lot about what I follow on social media, but it's been absolutely full with kind of discussions of, you know, Nosferatu, which just delights me massively.
All right, you know, beautiful, and thank you so much for suggesting it, Kirsty, because it was a delight to rediscover. And you know, I think it will live for another 100 years. But so somebody else will be podcasting about it then, probably just using their own brainwaves. Who knows? So thank you so much for that. Well, there we are then. Happy 100th birthday, Nosferatu. Now, if you've never seen the movie, it is very, very available in its original silent, visual-only form. You can easily find it in all manner of places on the internet, because it is, of course, public domain now. But if you want to watch a version with one of the more modern musical scores attached, you probably have to pay for that, depending on when the music was done. But it is out on Blu-ray and DVD, and I think at present it's also on Amazon Prime, free to subscribers, although I'm not sure what region that is. Well, now we're going to do our usual little news discussion in the last 10 minutes of the podcast rather than the first 10 minutes, because that's how long we've got. So, again, you pointed me in the direction of a couple of things this week, Kirsty. So there's a new Jordan Peele film coming out called
Nope.
Nope, it's called Nope. I'm sorry, these one-word titles. And there's also a new Alex Garland film called, is it called Men or is it called MEN?
Well, I mean, this is the thing is, I'm going to, kind of refer to, on Twitter, Matt Hills, who listeners might know is a very well-respected media kind of academic. And he pointed out on Twitter that, you know, Garland has got form for doing this, which is presenting a title, and you're going to go, oh, okay, that's that title, that's what that means. And then in the course of the, you know, so Devs in particular is the example here. Devs is not actually Devs in the, you know, in Devs. It's something else. So what he points out is that it's that when A24 refer to the film, it's in capital letters.
Yes.
So what he suggests is that the lead character in the film might be suffering from multiple experience neuropathy.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So yeah.
Well, before we discuss them in detail, let's allow the listeners to hear a bit from the trailers. Obviously, if you want to see the full trailers, they're on YouTube. Go look for them. Nope comes first, followed by Men. Men, there's not so much dialogue in the particular trailer, so I'll put a snippet of sound in, and then we can talk about it.
Did you know that the very first assembly of photographs to create a motion picture was a 2-second clip of a black man on a horse? And that man is my great-great-grandfather.
Great.
There's another great-grandfather. But that's why back at the Haywood Ranch, as the only black-owned horse trainers in Hollywood, we like to say, since the moment pictures could move, yeah, skin in the game.
What's a bad miracle? They got a word for that?
Yeah, nah.
That was Jordan Peele's Nope. This is Alex Garland's Men.
What are you doing here?
And we're back. So that was the trailers first of Jordan Peele's Nope, and secondly for Alex Garland's Men. Yeah. So Kirsty, your thoughts?
I'm so excited about both of them for different reasons. One, Jordan Peele, just what a gift to the world that he is. And there's I was going to say non-horror related recommendation. All of Key and Peele is now on Amazon Prime, which is wonderful. And what's interesting to me, particularly kind of watching it retrospectively, is like sort of that it at a certain point it takes, a sketch show, it takes quite a hard turn towards horror and horror parody. Right. So almost sort of setting up the kind of trajectory of his career. So I'm absolutely kind of looking forward to this. It's very kind of clearly kind of sci-fi horror, but with kind of Peele's sort of trademark kind of sense of humor, aspects of social criticism, etc. So bring it on. Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm a huge fan of him. I've seen the first full episode of the sketch show on Prime, but I've also seen loads of the sketches, some of which I absolutely love. And there are some very horror centered, post-apocalyptic kind of things there. I would recommend anyone gives them a YouTube and see what comes up. There are some classics. I think this film looks great fun. I'm slightly less excited by Peele stuff than I was about a year ago. I haven't seen Lovecraft Country, but I loved Get Out. I loved Black Klansman, which he didn't write or direct, but he was involved significantly with. I thought Oz was pretty good. But Candyman, I was a bit disappointed with, although obviously he didn't direct that either. I love him, and I love his take on things, but in a way, I still think my favourite of his productions is Get Out. I really want him to, I really want him to do something else which hits that height. It's a really good indication that this movie has Daniel Kaluuya in it again. It's always good to see him. There's obviously the combination of the fact that Jordan Peele is a humour smith as well as a horror creative and a horror fan. The ideas are really intelligent and funny and collide together in odd ways. I think that the new movie looks kind of bizarre. It takes its starting point of that kind of stud ranch thing, and that kind of proud moment of that family's history with that first black person riding a horse in that piece of film. And it kind of spins off from that. I think it looks like it might be goofy. It looks like I don't know what to expect, and in a way that's great. I do think that I can't predict what direction he's going to go in, whether it's going to be comedic or horrific.
Or probably a combination of both. But I just love the title though. Just like the idea of a response to anything potentially kind of world changing. Just nope. I don't know
quite how the title is relevant to the movie, but I guess you have to say that. But it is a fantastic title by itself. Just on the subject of titles, Peele didn't have anything to do with the series Them, did he?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I wouldn't want to put money on it.
Because
he was involved in the Twilight Zone, the new.
Yes, I know he did that, but it's just that with Them, which I haven't seen, but just the art direction of the images and things was so like Us, the movie Us, that if I was Jordan Peele, I'd want to sue them. And also, the title's Them, so you've got Us and Them. It's like it's a deliberate parody. So I mean, I'd like to see Them. I've heard that it's very, very powerful and a lot to take.
Yes.
I'm intrigued by that relationship.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've only got a few more minutes, so let's just quickly mention Men or MEN. I'll be honest, my only real reaction to the trailer was, oh, it's Jesse Buckley, who's fantastic. Yes. So that was good, but I kind of came out of it thinking, that was intriguing. What the hell's that going to be about? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, that's an A24 trailer, though, isn't it? I think. Basically, it's. I mean, I'm slightly bemused by it in that kind of after sort of three pieces that were pretty solidly science fiction based, the idea that at least on the face of it, the trailer seems to be folk horror. I find it's interesting, and that's how it's been read by, kind of commentators as well, that he's moving into a kind of more kind of clearly horror territory, which is not historically where he's been. So I wonder whether or not there is some, kind of science fiction elements in there. We just don't know it yet. But I mean, I'm intrigued by it. It looks beautiful. His stuff always looks. I'm so delighted that he's, one of the things that he said after kind of Ex Machina, after Annihilation, where he had a pretty terrible experience with the studios, was that he was just going to work in television because he felt like he had more control. And I'm so glad he did, because I love devs. But I'm kind of also glad that he's able to kind of come back to cinema and do something, that looks kind of a bit more focused and a bit more kind of crystal. But it looks beautiful. It looks so lovely, and I'm whatever it is, I'm there for it.
No, it does. And is it getting a wide release then? Do we know?
Well, one assumes so. I'm not entirely sure at the moment.
In cinemas rather than on streaming.
Again, don't know. In 2022, who would want to, who would want to get money anywhere for any particular release strategy? I don't know. I mean, the last A24 big one was Green Knight, which had a very, very small cinema release and then went on straight onto Amazon. But then things were different. Then there might be more appetite to actually putting it into cinemas. But wherever it is, I will find it.
Yes,
I will be there. So,
Garland, do you have that commitment from Kirsty?
Yes, absolutely.
You're going to sell at least one ticket.
One ticket.
Get it out there.
Because I'll make Sven go with me.
Oh, fantastic. Bless him. Right, that brings us to the end of the episode then. I think just before we go, I want to deliver a quick message from our co-host, Howard. Bless him. I've been speaking to him today. He's aware that, obviously, the listeners know that he's been away from the podcast for a while, and he just wants to reassure everyone that he's okay. It was very sadly, I think it's okay to say now, his father passed away a few months ago, and he's been looking after his mum ever since. But she's much better, and he's okay. And he will be coming back to the podcast at some point. We just don't know when. So that's from Howard to everybody out there. Just a big hello.
Hi, Howard.
And thank you for listening. Because we know our listeners care, and God bless you, all of you who've downloaded this. All right then, Kirsty, I think that's our Nosferatu episode wrapped up. But and I think that's Shadow of a Vampire episode seeded for the future.
Oh yeah.
And also Caligari episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% down for Caligari. I'm ready to go now.
Right. Okay. I'll meet you there at some point in the near future. We'll definitely do that. All right. Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Listeners, will be back next month and maybe sometime in between as well. So keep your eyes on our Twitter and our podcast feed. You'll hear from us again soon. Thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow and T.D. Velasquez. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.